We have us.
We have us, that's also true. Well, great for joining us as panelists. You can also turn on your cameras if you wish, Amina and Venera. You don't have to, it will be live streamed, so it's really up to you.
And Riston.
Hello.
Riston and Nella and Madeline and I went to the opera in Odessa.
That's true.
We did.
Oh, yes. Wait a minute. I'm trying to... I don't have Wi-Fi. Sorry.
Where are you, Riston? You don't have Wi-Fi?
I'm in the north, in the country.
Oh, of course, in your strawberry beds.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Why can't I turn my camera on?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can hear you. But...
Yes. And I heard opera in Odessa. I can't see.
So, Ristin, it's because you're attendee. You can be promoted to panelist, which you're welcome to. If you want to be on camera.
Oh, that explains it. No, I just wanted to greet you, but I'll just do it like this.
Oh, get promoted.
I don't have Wi-Fi. I have a very poor connection.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Riston, I just want to alert you, I'll be in Stockholm in mid-September.
Oh, really?
Yeah, doing a thing for Anik Vibben at, what's it
doing
called?
A thing for whom?
You know, Anik Vibben at, what's it called? The National Security University? What is it? Yeah, you know, Gorna.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how it's a foreign policy.
Right.
Yes.
It sounds like a military academy, and maybe it was originally. But
maybe it's going to be a NATO academy shortly.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. But she's a good critic. Anyway, that's why I'll be over in your territory.
Great. So then you can sort out the whole NATO debacle.
Oh, easily. Just give me, I don't know, 8 hours or so.
Okay.
If you can do it even better. And when are you going to Cambridge?
See now we're arranging our whole social life here.
Yes.
Right.
So, I'll do that later. So let me just say to people joining, welcome. We'll maybe wait for another 4 minutes for the latecomers, or if somebody wants to be on camera, you're more than welcome to join us on camera, but we will need to promote you to a panelist. So, and that's due to my not knowing the Zoom platform. But yeah, if you want to be on camera, just type in the chat box and Adelaide or Rebecca will promote you to panelist. You're welcome to be on camera. It will be live streamed, so.
Yeah, apparently it's live stream on Facebook. That's my line. I had to say that as the moderator.
Well, hopefully some other people will come. That's the one line you have.
Madeline, I'm surprised that's your line. It sounds way too technical for you.
I've been rehearsing it all night, Riston.
So Amina, after we promote her, yeah.
Amina, where are you?
I'm in Sarajevo.
Oh, right around the corner.
So I think we've got quite a few from London, have we? Or at least the UK. Janet, you're there, right? Janet McLeod? We're still in UK? Or Manchester now?
She's got her mute on.
Yeah.
Being a good Zoom kind of person. And Lepa. Hi, Lepa.
Oh, this is becoming like a reunion.
Wait a minute, I don't know where I am.
Lepa, you don't know where you are?
Do you see
You
me?
always know where you are.
Do you see me, I mean?
No,
we don't. Do you
but
want
we
to
hear you.
If you want to be seen, we can promote you to attendee. No, sorry, whatever. Panelist, sorry.
Yeah, Lepa, I just promoted you as a panelist, so you can be seen if you turn your camera on.
Come on, Lepa, out. I was all waiting for Lepa to attend now. No pressure at all.
Okay, but so maybe in a minute or so we can start. Right?
Elena, are you in London? Elena Stavlevska.
Yes, I am in London. I won't be on camera because I'm exhausted. I've had all sorts of meetings all day. But I'm here and I'm looking forward to the conversation you're having.
Excellent. Well, we've already started. We're just not doing anything serious at the moment. That's the thing. I suppose we ought to start,
That's
really.
the best word.
Yes, we are. We're saying when we're going to have wine together, you know, which city, when.
Sarajevo shortly, I think.
Oh, I'm a little jealous.
No, well, you're not going to be far. If you're going to be in London, you can nip. And yeah, you can nip over to. You can. Shit, we used to do it all the time. Should we start? Otherwise, I'm afraid we're just going to carry on gossiping forever, especially when everyone else starts jumping into the gossiping. Well, all the technical information I have already shared with you, which is this being live streamed on Zoom. And there's apparently a live transcription closed captioning enabled. So if you want to press a button and see things. Thank you, Riston, for that. Oh, you got your hand up. Already.
Oh, sorry.
You couldn't follow my technical explanation, could you?
No, I just wanted to applaud you. Sorry.
I love the support that I get from you guys. It's really wonderful. Yeah, so that's the technical stuff. We were going to do it so that at about 12:30 we would open for chat, and you could either chat in the chat box or you could stick your hand up, and then we would actually have you as a, I don't know, promote to panelists, I'm not quite sure, just, you know, enable you to show your faces so that you can jump in. But seeing as there aren't that many of us, I'm sure we can have a much more relaxed conversation, as you can tell. So for those of you, I think we all know each other, don't we, pretty much?
But we're not a club.
We're not a club. We're not a club or a cult even. Nothing like that. So I'm just quick introductions of the people who are going to speak, and then if you want to introduce yourselves, why not, as we go along. Just to say, the idea is we'll have an informal discussion about the chapters, the essays that constitute the piece that is not. Plug for piece that is not a must read for everybody. And then, as I say, we will invite people to open up for questions. So I'm Madeline, for those that don't know me, I'm Madeline Rees. I'm the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, but I was in Bosnia before that, working for the Ombuds Office and for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Hello, Riston. So I have opinions on things as well, so I'm going to undoubtedly jump in and share them with you at some point. But way more important are the people who actually lived there from the very beginning and have the expertise. And that's Nela Porovic-Isakovic, who is a friend, colleague, WILPF, truly amazing political economist and activist, and whose, I think, expertise has added so much to the work of WILPF in so many different areas, not least in Bosnia, but across the world. And then also joining is the longtime collaborator with WILPF and with Nela is Gorana Milanovic, and the incredible work she's done. I mean, I've got to say, she's known her for years, but she's always coming up with the most incredible feminist critique analysis of just about anything that moves, but particularly in relation to sexual violence and armed conflict. I think we all learned an awful lot from you in the work that you've done on that. And on these essays, I mean, just amazing work. And the third ostensible panelist is, it's this terrible for you to be a panelist, Cynthia Enloe. Again, known to all of you as the person with the feminist spotlight, which is trained on everything to do with militarism and beyond, and whose wisdom is valued even by those who are afraid of her. So with that, I'm going to say just a few words why WILPF has been supporting the publication of and then the distribution of these essays. And that's not least because, you know, as a 107-year-old peace organization, we've seen God knows how many conflicts from beginning to end and the continuation of them. And it's absolutely fascinating how little of the reality comes out from behind the scenes and how things are created. So you can do the analysis of how you got there, yeah, and sometimes that's right, and sometimes, and I think we're getting better at doing that because now feminists have come in and started critiquing the entire structural relationship between what's happening on the ground and how the responses happen. And so we see better, we can do indicators, we know and can predict what's likely to happen. And then it does. And then they ask us, well, are you going to just stop it then? Well, we know what we need to do to stop it, and we know what we need to do going forward, but we don't sit in positions of power. But this is one of the reasons why it's so important to have these essays. What happens before, what happens during, how does that impact on the way in which a peace settlement is created And then the implementation of that peace. What does it look like? Who's empowered to do it, and who gets left out? And then really importantly, what is the narrative that comes from all of these conflicts? I think it's very clear to all of us who've been engaged in this work, and especially for WILPF for over 107 years, is the narrative that comes out is militarism. We do need it. It gives us our security, and we need an economic system which enables that to continue to move forward into the next conflict. So we don't actually learn, we don't actually change. And that's why these essays are so important. So that's why WILPF sees it as fundamental to the work that we do and integrated the work we do. And I'm going to pass it on to Cynthia Enlow, to jump in with her views on what it is that we have, what has been written here and why it's important.
Thanks, Madeline, and thanks to everybody who's joined in. We'll have this as a good conversation. Nella and Garna were very nice and let me see one of the early iterations of the piece that is not. And do look in the chat. I think one of our wonderful WILPF assistants, Adelaide, has put in the chat the link to this remarkable report called The Piece That Is Not. So look in your chat and be sure and download the link. If you haven't read this report already, please read it. I've been so educated by it. It's a remarkable feat. It is a feat to create such a thorough, critical, eyes wide open, feministly understood assessment of not only what post-war looks like in Bosnia, but why it looks like that. And it names names. It names who crafted the post-war. I think, well, for me, there are whole bunches of things that I'll jump in during the conversation to underscore, but that I've learned. And one of the most that will stay with me, although I, by the way, I printed it out. I'm a printer outer, right? I printed it out and I mark it up. I mark up my report. Right?
I want
There's
you
no
to
such
sign
thing
it,
as
and I
a-
want that.
Yes, right. How can you read without a pen in hand, right? So print it out, pass it along. But one of the things that has really stunned me, I think, even though I knew about Dayton, I knew there were no women at Dayton, you know, that sort of thing, which is important to know. But I think what Garna and Nella have taught me is how that has played out. That is the absence of women's experiences, the absence of Bosnian feminist understanding, Bosnian feminist analysis in the making of this alleged peace, the peace that is not, has created such deep flaws in this peace that is not. And it's just a reminder that it's not just about representation. That is, women should be at the table. Well, of course they should. But what needs to be at the table is feminist analytical knowledge that comes directly from local women who have experienced the lead up to the armed conflict, who have experienced every stage of the armed conflict. The first 100 days in Ukraine is not the same as the second 100 days in Ukraine, and have experienced the so-called post-war. And for a lot of us, looking at everybody who's joined in today, I think it's taken time for us all over the last 20, 30 years maybe, to really understand that feminist activist analysts, which are really the only kind of serious analysts, the activist engaged sort, have to keep telling each other and the world and other feminists what is patriarchal about the post-war and why the post-war is so deeply patriarchal. One of the things that Garna and Nella tell us, they tell us several times, but I even marked it down here. I think it's on page 114. But they remind us that if peace is imagined to be just going back to a post-war normal, if that's the imagined peace, then it means that the peace will be structured so that patriarchy can be sustained. And if patriarchy is sustained in the so-called peace agreement, then in fact, remilitarization is almost certain to happen again. If patriarchy is not upfront and highlighted as a cause, it's bad enough as a consequence, but as a cause for militarization, a cause for exploitation, a cause for the sustaining of communal tensions. If patriarchy is not mapped out as a cause, then it is most certain to be sustained. You know, we talk about sustainable development as if sustainability is always a good thing. Sustainability isn't a good thing. It depends what you're sustaining. And if what you're sustaining is a patriarchy that constantly legitimizes militarization and misogyny, then in fact sustaining patriarchy as integral to any peace agreement is disastrous. And Garna and Nella have mapped out for us exactly what that disaster looks like in every area of Bosnian life. I think it's just an invaluable report to be used by everybody everywhere. So let me just ask, since it is such a remarkable feat, let me ask Garna and Nella, I have a little hint of it, but tell everybody, what was it like to actually try and investigate this peace that is not? And what surprised you that became really hard to do?
Should I start, Goran? Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Madeline. And thanks for all joining us. So yeah, let me start with saying, and you know this, Cynthia, that we actually started doing this as a blog. We were supposed to write one blog around the 25th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement. And the blog was supposed to be in response to so much noise that was happening around the anniversary. You know, everyone seemed to have something to say on the Dayton Peace Agreement. There were many, many panels, many conferences, articles were written, and it was so noisy, really. But I think all of that noise, it was very, very tangible that there was an absence of Bosnian critical voices, and primarily, as you say, feminist critical voices. Looking not just at sort of where Bosnia is today, but also how we got here, you know, and with whom did we get here, with whose help, right? So we started writing this blog in response to that. And both of us have worked, not just worked on sort of deep Dayton Peace Agreement related issues, but we very much, as you said, lived the consequences of the peace agreement. And as activists had spent so much time thinking and also posing and reacting on some of its structures. So I think, at least from my side, there was this feeling that we had a lot of things to say. There was all this noise going on. And I think sort of part of the motivation was also to make sure that there is at least one, well, not one, but a very critical voice coming from Bosnia, because most of the voices were coming from outside. And also, I think when I look back at the process, because this one blog turned into 9 essays and a whole year worth of writing, right? What we wanted to bring to light with these essays and with these many different subjects that kept opening was what was not talked about in these conferences and panels and analysis, namely the accountability for the corruption, the militarization, the strengthening of the ethno-nationalist projects, for the exploitation of land, labor by both domestic and international capital, for the empowerment, etc. and to talk about it not as a surprise development, you know, of the last few years in which ethno-nationalist elite had somehow magically lost control and was able to do all of this, but actually to show that this was an inevitable trajectory of the neoliberal peace that was so carefully, really, when you look at the entire process from the war through negotiations to implementation of so-called peace, was very, very carefully crafted through the Dayton Peace Agreement, but also the related mechanisms. And I think everyone now these days seems to be, you know, washing their hands from the mess that this so-called peace agreement created. Nobody really acknowledges that Bosnia and Herzegovina today is a product of colonial approach of the so-called international community. And I think something that Goran and I keep coming back in the essays, and that we had discussed prior to writing essays, and also then I think became for me even more clear, is that we constantly need to question what is international community? How did they get their mandates? Who are they and why are they here? And what sort of role do they play? So, so Bosnia, yeah, is not a product. It just didn't happen. This was very sort of a trajectory that was almost preventable, and you could foresee it happening. So no one is off the hook, not in our essays at least. So, I think while writing it, so we were doing it in parallel to these analyses that were happening. And from my point of view, what I was seeing is that a lot of these analyses were not just silent on fully on critiquing all of the different actors, but they were actually actively, many of them, reproducing partial truths, or even, I think, exonerating actors in this sort of failed experiment that Bosnia is. Not at least European Union, but and its role in both sort of the immediate peace negotiations, the peace implementation, but also the current reforms that are ongoing. But also, I remember there was this one article that, well, Goran will know who I'm talking about, but it really struck me because it came out, and it's this Bosnian guy, he lives in the States, he's an academic in the States, and he came out with an article that actually said that it is only the United States that can save us, with literally these words, well, not literally, but paraphrasing. And just sort of to remind you that this came just about the same time as Trump was challenging elections. The insurgency in Washington was around the corner. So it was almost comic, you know, but also a prevalent opinion, right, in these analyses, that somehow we need to look again to this international community to save us. We need to look again to the very same processes in solutions. So yeah, with all of that in parallel, these 9 essays really just kept swelling and swelling, although as I think we probably have a lot more to say, I should say. But one of the very surprising, and I'll stop here and Goran, I can fill in, one of the, well, not so much surprising, but awakening for me was how much of knowledge we lack, transparency in institutions in terms of how we moved from. So the Dayton Peace Agreement is a very dry document. It says a little bit, it's not a very, you know, it's not a very extensive document, but a lot of it developed as a consequence to it. And we do not see a clear, there is no transparency in how that happened, how we moved from A, B to C, and what were the rationales behind it. And for me, as somebody that lives in Bosnia, lives the consequences of it, it's hugely important to know how we got here, how institutions were created. And so I was a bit taken back that we really lack that part of our, I think, common history. So I'll stop here. Sorry, Goran, for taking a long time. Go ahead.
It's not a problem. I mean, first, thank you, Cynthia, for, I mean, great introduction. Madeline, for always supporting everything that we do. So, and Lepa's waving, so hello, Lepa. And then I'll just like sort of continue on Nella's kind of, first of all, want to say that, yes, important to say is that we named this experimenting with a peace, and we have been really just experiments, not saying that everyone knew what they were doing at the point of any time making decisions. So it's not about conspiracy theory, just to kind of not to sound like, yes, everything was planned, but everything was framed within specific ideology. Ideology that at the beginning we completely kind of negated as existing one. And probably that's one of the reasons, I mean, talking about neoliberal ideology, and probably that's one of the reasons why we weren't attentive as much. Bosnia, I mean, it's important to say Bosnia is not the first one as an experiment with a neoliberal peace, but it is specific for just being, I guess, so in the Europe, so easily accessible, and so much kind of attractive. And we kind of we try to actually in our essays as well write really cynically, and to write, it really was the country that kind of attracted everyone. Everyone could come, and it's close to the beaches as well as the mountains. So it's really attractive geographic position as well as is accessible. So everyone could actually come and intervene in whatever they kind of thought was important. But from throughout that, feminist interventions weren't allowed. I mean, yes, we kind of know neoliberalism did co-opt feminism with certain ideas, and we have to recognize that, because quite a lot of things have been appearing as kind of representing women's interests, but not really reading feminism and not really being political in that sense. The second thing that I really want to say, and this is about experience of writing an essays, is it's a part of, again, neoliberal framework, and that's politics of forgetting. Really important is that war was considered as a zero, and that's how it's a colonial kind of framework of mind. War as a zero, there was nothing beforehand, and we are building something that kind of is there that we imagine. So given that there were too many people, we really just got a chaos and mess, and everyone was kind of having their intervention implied. But politics of forgetting also played in a sense that Nella already mentioned. There was no there is no institutional memory. Things changed, like we are talking of 25 years post-war, things changed rapidly, almost every single year, under using kind of different reforms paradigm. But there is no trace of how anything came about. And it was actually because of our lived experiences, we could remember and we could trace. So not always could trace successfully, because things would just disappear, either from internet or from, like, when we talk about institutional memory, let's say, it's almost impossible now to find how the institution of ombudsman actually came about, the one that we have it now. So the institutions are also kind of organized in that way not to remember. So that's one thing. The second thing is when we kind of try to talk about how we ended up with the Dayton, we were relying on personal information. It is of those specific participants that were in the Dayton military base, and then afterwards wrote the memoirs, wrote articles about them being present. And when you write personal memoir, you actually kind of want to be the most important person in there. So you kind of really learn how that person that wrote article or something thought, and it is particularly important that he kind of thought he was important. So you are actually forced to rely on kind of imagining things as well. reading afterwards, reading what happened afterwards. And as Nella said, Dayton Peace Agreement is dry document. It only kind of, it only allows to division of power between the certain elites. It does create elites, political elites, and it is about, creating a space that those elites remain in power forever. And again, it was in the military base, so it was really militaristic. It was in the middle of the war, and it was written by not written, but signed by the men. But many of them were actually later ending up on the kind of were either accused of war crimes, because not all of them were kind of alive to be found guilty of war crimes, but many did. So that's another important aspect. And we are kind of forced to listen and look into those encounters. And it is something that process never was open. Process was never open for discussion with the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. People of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this is something probably that I would say might not look feminist, but it is really something that is ingrained in the feminist analytics, is that we kind of really see exclusion. And exclusion, in addition to given that we are shaped now as a ethnic society that has an ethnically based politics, in addition to kind of ignoring every other ethnic belonging as opposed to the three recognized political ones, all the people of Bosnia were actually ignored, apart from the political elite. And exclusion, it is really hard to talk about exclusion when you kind of think 99% of people are excluded. And this is something that is important. And I'll just stand up here. It is, again, really important for us was actually important as we were learning about how that played with us. We could actually compare how neoliberalism and neoliberal ideology with identity in that individualism actually really did play with us as well. So
let me ask you both, let me just jump in. One of the things that struck me as I read your fantastic is it 9 essays? How many essays? 9? Amazing. It's just amazing. And that is I think it's patriarchal, deliberate laziness that leads, especially the international, as Nella, let's all put it in quotes, the international community, which all of us should be able to name the people in it, right? International community is never an actor, and that is their lazy patriarchal reliance on the notion of ancient ethnic tensions or ancient ethnic rivalries. That it is so Orientalist, but it happens within the West as well, right? Everybody is reduced, as Garna says, everyone is reduced to their ethnicity as defined by outsiders. And it makes so invisible deliberately any class diversity or class inequality, any gender diversity or gender understandings, regional, professional, and I'm struck by it because I ran into it first as a basis for feminist critique. That is a critique of international elites' reliance on ancient ethnic rivalries, because it allows them to channel all their solutions into ethnic categorized solutions, but it also allows them to underscore the ancient, which means that they can be the civilized, right? And also, if something is ancient, it means you don't have to have any curiosity to do any kind of investigations of what industrial politics looked like in the former Yugoslavia, what class relationships look like, what social movements look like. And so the reliance on ancient ethnic rivalries was also a basis for critique by Iraqi feminists in the middle of the US occupation of Iraq from 2003 to 2010, 11, 12. And Iraqi feminists kept trying to say to those who could get heard at all, tried to say to the American occupation authorities, this isn't, it's much more complicated than that. We have, as in the former Yugoslavia, we have many quote unquote mixed marriages. We have many people who don't identify, with your ethnic categories, and you're overlooking all of that. And the Americans just didn't want to hear it. And I think one of the reasons that outside elites don't want to hear it is, first of all, they don't like complexity, because then they can't engage in their own simple-minded, strategically simple-minded solutions. But secondly, it allows them to stand above the society they're manipulating by imagining that they're civilized and everybody else is wallowing in some ancient identities, even though they all have identities, of course. And so could you just talk a little bit, the two of you, about where you ran into this, the results of this kind of international Orientalist thinking? And Madeline probably wants to ride on that anyway.
I'm going to jump in as the moderator. Just to say, I think add in, you've got ancient tribal hatreds, but don't forget communism. Because the fear and hatred of anything that smacked of anything to do with communism, words like solidarity, economic social rights, you name it, they were just anathema. We had so many American consultants come in, and one of the first things they wanted to do was slash maternity leave to 2 weeks. That's what they were thinking of all the time, was not enabling or not recognizing a very complex history and the ways in which people had been before. And I met with so many of the ministers, even the human rights ministers, who were bemoaning the fact that the ways in which there had been real solidarity in relation to housing, education, that sort of thing before, was just being burnt, literally. I mean, it was really just appalling. And just to say, in terms of, there were a lot of us working inside the international community, and we actually termed it collective. The international community was actually a form of collective imperialism. And the idea of introducing some of the issues that we needed to into their discussions was just anathema. The idea of having Bosnian women interact with those in the international community, with the decision makers, was just not going to happen. Just wasn't going to happen. It happened in splendid isolation. There was this international OHR, and then all the UN agencies, and then UNMIB, who formed this absolute protective cocoon around themselves. And anybody who disagreed with Dayton, any official who disagreed with Dayton, would be removed. So you couldn't even have a critique. It was absolutely that bad. So anyway, I will pass it on to the real Bosnians now. And Lepa, we want you to join at some point, of course. But Nella, you're going to go next. Karina, going to respond to Cynthia?
Yeah, I can. No, you're sort of really, both of you are completely right, and specifically with this ancient tribalism, which it was there from the very beginning, right? From the sole understanding about how sort of Bosnia is sort of part of Yugoslavia, how it didn't function, the lack of understanding. So the fact that Bosnia was never one nation, one state, which is this, I think, if we want to use primordial understanding of it in sort of Western thinking of how states are and what states are. So Bosnia was poorly understood by them. And this was from the very beginning, because even the earliest attempts to negotiations were always based on division. So there was never, ever an idea that there might be a chance of sort of building on what Bosnia was as the Republic of Bosnia as part of Yugoslavia, and taking it forward into the sort of transitioning from breakup of Yugoslavia. So this this idea sort of lingered on, kept on, was part of all of their thinking all the time, and is continuously. I mean, we're talking now 25 years. You would think that, you know, sometimes you make mistakes and then you correct your mistakes and then you try to do better. But if you look at the last, well, 27, I guess, 28, I don't even know, 27 years now, the continuity of understanding the Bosnian society as such, of course, also by entrenching the identities, because by now we are almost living this idea. So the identities have been, the ethnic identities are entrenched. So it's easier for them, I guess, even more now than earlier, to lean back on this idea of ancient tribalism, because people have fallen back to these identities. But where we see it now, just to go back to Cynthia's question, I mean, we see it everywhere. I think literally everywhere. We see it, I think, also even in the aspects of how civil society works, how civil society also communicates with each other, what are the problems we are addressing. We see it obviously still in attempts to some sort of political, I don't want to say solutions, because that's not what there is. There's political discussions of some sort. It's very ingrained in all of these aspects. And probably even worse now than, I think Goran and I spoke about this many times, that the early years after the war, there was still some openings, right? We still, even if we had this imposed idea of ancient hatred and tribalism and whatnot, it was still sort of early on, we still had memory of Bosnia as it looked, of Yugoslavia. So there was maneuver space, I think, to do something with it. But the longer we went down that road, the more difficult it becomes. So for me, I think it's even worse now. I think we have less maneuver space to sort of think beyond that. I don't know if that's answered to your question, but just my thinking out loud.
No, it's very.
Yeah.
But,
Carla?
I mean, has anyone got any other questions? Because I can continue on Nella's kind of points, or.
Well, actually, Goran, could I actually see if we can bring in Lepa, because the ancient tribal hatreds and the communism, that was Yugoslavia. And Lepa is representative of the formers. So I'd like to bring you in on that, to see what coming from the other side of the line, as it were, with problems, what your take is on that.
Another socialist lover. Well, first of all, I'm really fascinated what we already heard in this half an hour, and great that we all together. So, first of all, this summary of Cynthia, that if it is not mapped and identified as a patriarchy, then it will continue as a patriarchy. Then neoliberal, so it's patriarchal, neoliberal, it's militarist, and it's based on male experience. That's what's for me patriarchal. That means the history of male experience has its own characteristics and its way of thinking and reasoning. So that's what patriarchy is, and therefore militarism is part of it. And this raising of socialist regime. I think it's really fantastic how it's all summarized. So I have one association and one question. One association is really that in general, the war erases the past. I remember when I was young in this socialist Yugoslavia, it was always said the history starts in 45. Like I didn't have a clue what happened before. I mean, other than the partisan war from 41 to 45. But what was before 41? Well, I wasn't much into history, but it wasn't that it wasn't important, you know, how to say, in this public. So for me, there is one thing is that war itself erases the past. So I think that has to be taken in consideration. But another thing is that, and my other association is that I remember after 2000, talking to my friend Imbala Rogova from Kosovo, that she was so angry that internationals came and conceived Kosovo as a state themselves, erasing everything they've done before. You know, like as women's groups, as activism. You know, she said, for example, they had to go and register their feminist group from the day the new law on NGO is set up, as if that's the beginning. They couldn't register as if something that they've been working 10 years earlier. No, you know. So this is what I mean. So these internationals who come and start from the beginning, I mean, that's already seen also in other places. So just sort of to broaden a little bit these issues that we are talking, and how much this is all patriarchal. I think it's really fantastic that we go on into this. So my question is really, because I'm also into emotions, and I think that emotions are really crucial for our remembering and thinking as well. So my question for both of you is, from after the war, what were the first pain that you felt from all these different dimensions, which were effects of the Dayton Agreement in your life? Like the first, you know, you have written in fantastically that Dayton Agreement is in every dimension of, you know, of the state and society, etc. So, but in your life, what was something in the beginning that you remember that Dayton Agreement was really like some experience of pain, or you were angry or whatever, you know, like at the very beginning, what was something that you can remember that was the effect of the Dayton Agreement on your life?
Caroline, can I kick that one over to you?
I cannot reply, but because I'm not in emotion, I don't remember. So that's a kind of thing. But I would kind of follow as well on Nella and try probably to answer Lepa. It's not that war did not play as ethnic. I mean, we ended up with genocide, so we need to kind of acknowledge that ethnicity was used in creating and forming the war, in fight for power, full on creation of masculinist, misogynist ways how it played, and interventions were actually kind of went into that. I mean, with not understanding former Yugoslavia and Bosnia, the interventions completely supported that, because it actually fitted the narrative. Because I want to acknowledge or try to paraphrase one of the Yugoslav kind of theoreticians, who is Boris Budin, who really stated that once Yugoslavia actually fell apart, and Bosnia in particular, once it Europeanized. And this is question of how we understand ethnicity, and how did we understand ethnicity? Because the point being that before that, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia and Serbia had different kind of historic issues around building of the nation, but Bosnia was really kind of was presented as fight for the territory and nations. I mean, understood in a form of nation state, equalizing ethnicity as a nation. And
oops, you're on mute.
Sorry,
we lost sound from you for a bit.
But now you're back. Now you're back.
So to answer Lepa's question, what Dayton actually confirmed, and what's emotional to me, is confirmed existence of the ethnicities I wasn't aware of, and something that I do not have. So let's say kind of influenced everything afterwards. but it confirmed, I mean, for me, the problem was that it confirmed what the perpetrators and those that were fighting for power forced into the narrative. And we kind of awarded perpetrators rather than anyone else. And that's something that's kind of, from my perspective, would be the first and throughout these 25 years of the 4+ of post-Dayton.
And that's so powerful, Goran. I think even following up from what Nella said, with that question of who are they and why are they here, and then enabling what you're saying is that continuation of rewarding those who should really have been not rewarded, shall we say. We haven't got a lot of time, but what I really want to do is ask, because these essays are so rich, and we haven't really got time to say, how did you select the various topics? But if you could just mention that in passing, because each one is a standalone, but put together, that's where they become so powerful. But the other question I want to ask is, going forward, I mean, these do not just apply to Bosnia. So where do you think and how do you think these could be used going forward? So I'll give it to Nella first.
Yes, how do we select? I think the teams were selecting themselves almost, and I would just say that actually Goran and I were talking just before this, that each and everything we dealt with in each of the essays, each essay actually could have been a book on its own. So we only brushed certain things. So there was so many more examples that could have been taken on board. So but we had to limit ourselves. So the themes, I think, followed off each other. We wanted, so the first one is about setting the stage. So we talked about how the Dayton came about, because, it didn't fall out of the sky. It was very geopolitically conditioned. So we wanted to make sure that was very visible, because that's one of the things that often when you talk about Dayton Peace Agreement, when people talk here, it's like, it just happened. It didn't just happen. It was conditioned by the context, by geopolitics, by the 90s, by everything. So then out of that, we looked at the peace agreement itself. It had military aspects, civilian aspects, and we tried to at least highlight the most critical aspects of it. But again, I think each essay can probably be a book on its own. What we didn't have, I guess, space anymore or time, because we were now in a year, and that we both of us really want to do, and maybe that will be our next project, is to dig into United Nations and development agencies in particular. So we brushed upon UN very briefly as their participation in peacekeeping, etc. But we have not talked so much about the role of the UN in sort of implementing this neoliberal peace. So not just any peace, but the neoliberal peace. And that's maybe our next project that we would like to look at. So the application, maybe I can leave it for Goran to talk about, or I can just say that I think Goran already said, I mean, a lot of these things that we write about are not specific for Bosnia, but many of the things actually, when you start digging into it, Bosnia was the experiment. It didn't start with Bosnia, but it was among the first countries that some of these things got tested, like, DDR was tested a little bit in Africa, but was brought into conflict with Bosnia. It took some research to find out where the DDR came from, demobilization and disarmament, because that wasn't part of the Dayton Peace Agreement, but became part of the implementation. So a lot of it took research and looking into, but I think we talk about structures, and these structures are present. They are present in Iraq, as Cynthia was pointing out. They're present in Libya. They're present in Syria. They're present in Ukraine, for sure. So I think the application, or not the application, but look at the structures. Look at, I think it's helpful. These essays can be helpful in thinking, in finding where the structures are, and maybe then how they function in different contexts has slightly, there are shades, right? It's not always, it's never the same. But I think structures are there. And yeah, that's it for me.
No, and I think, Nella, you were just at a convening of Afghan women, and as we were doing that, I thought all the time how relevant the essays are to what's going on there, with the UN again having completely hijacked what is a brilliant mandate and turned it into something which is actually less than helpful in terms of what Afghan women need and aspire to. Gorna, have you any thoughts you'd like to add in there? And then I want to come back to Cynthia in case anybody's got a burning question to ask. So please put your hand up or jump in.
I'll try to be really quick because I kind of said at the beginning we live neoliberalism, and neoliberalism is actually part of the way how to stupidify us, and in order not to be analytical, but also to create a space for the certain power holders to gain more power. I mean, we are experiments on a small scale. We try to kind of show that throughout our essays, and we do not kind of, and the question is, first of all, of course, within the context, within the kind of effect for environment, we need to talk to kind of really talk about people need to take a power back. I mean, it sounds really kind of as a catchy phrase, but it is something that we have been stupidified for the last 30, 50 years, not being able to think anymore. I mean, we are, thanks to tweeters, we are just all smart. Nella said kind of we started with blog, ended up with essays, but these essays are not even kind of brushing on what all things could actually be there. But it's not, I mean, the point being, it shouldn't be on Nella and me. I would actually expect it quite more people engaging with that, but no, it's not happening because we are forced to kind of become slave robots in a sense that we are just here to work, provide for our families, that and be silent and not to think. And I think it's only about empowering people politically, and this is not to engage in elections, but it's actually to be active and to be able to understand political surrounding and act on it. So that's about it. I don't know whether I made sense or not.
Makes total sense. We've all got to wake up and actually do something instead of just letting it, this infantilization that you were talking about, really, it's just not peculiar to Bosnia, just one of them. Cynthia, can I bring you in?
Well, it's just riding right on what all three of you have said, and Lepa as well, and that is the piece that is not the neoliberal framed or structured piece feminizes men and women in the sense that it tries to convince men and women, because you can feminize anybody, right? That's the patriarchal genius. And you feminize all Bosnians, women and men, by convincing them that they are acted upon deservedly, that they are part of feminization, and you are grateful when other people's makes decisions for you. Because to be feminized is to be grateful that other people think for you, analyze for you, act for you. And it is so deeply patriarchal to create, I think, and these are what the essays I was writing all over the margins, because I was being taught and tutored by the two of you, that the patriarchal underpinnings of imposing a neoliberal model of alleged peace is to turn everybody into the passive grateful. And that takes some work. It's not easy to feminize either women or men. It's harder to feminize men, although other men try to do it all the time. It's a little easier to feminize women in a patriarchal society, but it's hard because Yugoslavia had a women's movement. Bosnia had women out on the streets opposing the war in 1991. So it's not easy to feminize even women. But the whole Dayton model depends on that kind of patriarchal feminization of men and women in a society, and it can be reversed.
Love that optimism. It can be reversed. It has to be reversed.
Determination. You know, sometimes my friends, of course, think that I'm optimistic. I think when people say that I'm optimistic, which sounds a bit naive, which sounds a bit feminized, Not that Madeline would ever say that about me.
Feminist, it sounds
Or
feminist.
Lepa even. But I've tried to think of, well, if I sound optimistic, what do I think I sound like? And I think I sound determined.
I think that's a great way of putting it. We're optimally determined. We are determined. And
sanguine.
that's something that WILPF has been for 170 years. We haven't
Yes.
got peace yet, but we haven't stopped yet either. So
No.
that's something. We're out of time, but Nella, please, I want you just to conclude.
I just want to say thank you for this book. I would have never read a book about Dayton Peace Agreement. Was it not written in such a fantastic way that I can understand even what's written there? I'm not into politics, I have to say. Really, this is the first book about Dayton Peace Agreements I ever read. So thank you for this lightness and ordinary way and feminist analysis. Bravo.
Echoing that. Nella.
Thank you, Lepa. We did our best, as Garana say. We put a lot of effort in our cynicism and everything to cover and to do it readable. So yeah, we are out of time. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to really thank some of the people who are on the call here. So obviously, Madeline and Cynthia, for all of the support you've provided. Maria O'Reilly, who's sort of provided commentary on one of our essays, but also a huge thank to Aida Spahic, who is on the call, but among the attendees, so you can't see her on the dot here, because we originally wrote the essays in English because they were for WILPF website, right, for international audience, but also then realized that, you know, we need it for our audience as well. And she really volunteered to do all the translations of these massive 9 essays, 1 year worth of project. So I just want to applaud Aida and thank her once more for really being a true feminist friend and supporter. So thank you. And also, just one final note, please, we would love to engage with any of you that are in the call. If you have any critique, questions, comments, whatever, it would be really great to get some feedback if you and when eventually get to read the essays. So please do.
Okay, and there is a microsite, correct? No.
Yes, that's the link that Adelaide has been posting. It's a microsite, so if you want to read it online with pictures and stuff, you can do that, or you can download the PDF as Cynthia printed out, or not. Save the trees. Save the trees.
These are recycled trees.
Good. There you go. So yeah, that's it.
Trees making their contribution towards peace going forward. Listen, thank you ever so much, everyone, for being here. And really, I think Nella Gorana, this really was the most incredible feat to be able to put that together. Next time I ask you to write a blog, I'll remember to call the publishers first. But really, just fabulous. And I think we really have to use it. We really have to use it. We learn and we move forward, and we have to be determined. So thank you, everyone, for participating today, and onwards.
Brava, 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 brava.
Ciao.
Ciao.